Radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right. Good evening, everybody. How you doing? Fade to Black. Today is Wednesday, May 24th, 2023. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. And tonight, Drew Beeson joins us. We're going to be talking about, well, a variety of true crime subjects, but specifically D.B. Cooper, the Zodiac Killer, and the Yuba County Five. Drew has been exploring the unknown all of his life. Believe it or not, he says he was inspired by Coast to Coast AM. That's right. Unsolved mysteries and stuff like that. Of course, we all were. And his first book was about the Zodiac Killer. His next book, D.B. Cooper. And his latest book is about the Yuba County Five and their disappearance. We're going to be talking about that first tonight. And he was recently featured on an episode of the History Channel's History's Greatest Mysteries. DrewBeesonBooks.com is the link below on our website and throughout social media. And I would like to welcome for the first time, I'm ready for this, Drew Beeson. Drew, good evening, young man. How you doing?
Doing well. Good evening, Jimmy. Hello to you and all your Fadernauts out there.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about right there. Hit it off. Okay, so then let's just get the formalities out of the way.
Sure.
And let's do the first-time guest disclaimer, Drew, which is this. It's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends, and where that conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends, it ends. But we're going to end as friends. There you go. Accept?
Got it. Accepted.
Accepted. Drew, it's great to have you on the show. And before I ask the obvious radio host softball first question, like, how did you get into all of this? I promise you we will do that in a minute. But I think even more fascinating with that is this nation and the world's fascination with true crime. True crime docuseries, miniseries, movies, podcasts, articles, blogs. It's all over the place, isn't it? It is a true crime world that we live in.
Yeah, it's huge and it's just blowing up. I mean, but I come from a background like you, paranormal, coast to coast, Art Bell, things like that, Unsolved Mysteries, which covered true crime and UFO stuff. In fact, my favorite episode of Unsolved Mystery was the Roswell show. I got to meet one of the producers on that, a guy named Sam Lucchese, who wasn't a UFO believer until he did that show and set up everything and got to meet a lot of the people that were still alive when they shot it and became a total believer in the UFO thing. So I come from that background. And then, what I like is classic American unsolved cases like D.B. Cooper and the Zodiac Killer, because there's so much mystique built around cases like that. That's what kind of attracted me to them.
When I am killing time, right? I just said the true crime. When I'm killing time, and I'm in between stuff that I need to watch, I go straight to television and find a true crime docuseries. It's always guaranteed, and I am addicted to it. I cannot stop watching it. Last night, I'm not going to say what I was watching last night because I stopped after the first episode, second episode. It was about an actor that I like, and I was getting a little disturbed by the whole thing. I was like, man, I don't need this. I'll stop watching them, but I don't need anyway. It was 2:00 in the morning. And I'm like, man, do I just keep going? Do I keep going with this?
You're binge watching.
That's what true crime does. I think I want to say this right. We know it's a dark world, right? We know it's a dark world. But the true crime stuff just shows us it could be your neighbor, right? You just don't know.
Absolutely.
And we were talking before the show, the gift that keeps on giving. It's the unsolved true
Yes,
crime.
that's the hook. That's the hook.
Okay, now here's the softball. I know that the list of DB Cooper suspects is long, and not everybody can be right. There's only one.
Yes, only can be one.
Only could be one.
Like the Highlander, there only can be one.
Right. This is a yes or no answer. We'll get to the real answer in a few minutes. Do you know who DB Cooper was?
I feel like I know who the best candidate is, but the disclaimer there is I can't put him on the plane. Well, no one could put any of the suspects on the plane, or we wouldn't be talking about DB Cooper. It would probably be solved if a suspect was on the plane. But that's a big disclaimer. No one could put their guy on the plane. It's still, unfortunately, a circumstantial case with almost no physical evidence really to speak of.
Yeah, pretty incredible. And here's the deal. It was like the perfect storm of screw ups and mistakes and technology, like all in a row. If anything could have gone wrong in that case, it did. And the fact that this was over United States airspace and you can't track a plane. And this was a jet, right? This wasn't like,
Boeing 727.
Yeah. It's not like we're talking about 1930 here. And that's the other part where it just throws this whole thing into a curve where we just don't have any answers anywhere, do we?
No. We're still, there's two mysteries here. One is, a young boy found some of DB Cooper's money in 1980 on the bank of Beach Bank along the Columbia River called Tina Bar. And it's like two mysteries in one with DB Cooper. One is how the money got there, and the other is who was DB Cooper. So it's two hotly contested things in one.
And okay, let's do the basics on DB Cooper. I actually wanted to start with the Yuba County Five. Okay, you know what? Let's actually start with the Yuba County Five.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. We'll end with DB Cooper. We'll put the Zodiac in the middle. We'll start with the Yuba County Five. It's because it is one of the craziest stories that I think we have in law enforcement. It's how it happened, and you've got sort of a witness there, but this isn't one of those headline cases that everybody knows about. And 100 books have been written, but it is a true mystery, isn't it?
It's a major mystery, and no one really had heard of it whatsoever until about 5 years ago. Some people started putting it on their YouTube channels that follow, that cover mysteries, like Dyatlov Pass that happened in Russia in 1959. And there's some parallels between this case and that one. But it was really YouTube and some channels that had, some pretty good following that people started finally hearing about this case. And it was before, 5 years ago, no one had really heard of it whatsoever. And there's still a lot of people that haven't. If you're not, a regular person to YouTube, you might not know it at all. But it's just mind bending.
It is mind bending, and I like the Dyatlov Pass comparison. There's quite a few actually. I like that a lot. So let's start with. I'm going to guess and say the majority of. I'll pop it in the chat. Hold on. I'm just going to do this in real time. I never participate in the chat during the show. It's too distracting. But in this case, who has heard of but I do show everybody how quickly I can type, and I can do it without looking at my fingers. Enter. Okay. Who has heard of the Yuba County Five? First, let's start with Yuba City, California. Where is it?
That's just about 45 minutes north of Sacramento, the capital of California. Is the Yuba City area, which is in Yuba County. It's called the Yuba County Five because the these guys lived in the Yuba City area in little towns called Marysville. Mainly lived in Marysville, and a town called Linda, and another one called Olivehurst. There's 3 little towns just bordering Yuba City, California.
And this happened in 1978.
Correct.
And we've got 5 kids involved, 5 boys. Let's go through that. What happened that night? What do we know? Set up the night is what I should say.
Well, the night started. These guys were they were grown men, but they were 4 of them were born intellectually disabled, and 4 of them had varying degrees of that. The outlier of the group, his name was Gary Matthias. He was actually a schizophrenic who had been taking medication, and he was pretty much under control. But he was different because when he was on his medication, he was fully functioning mentally. But the other 4 were not. But these guys all knew each other from a place called the Gateway Gators, which was a place that taught people with any kind of disability a trade, and it was kind of a place for them to hang out and play sports. And that's how they knew each other, because they were all on the basketball team called the Gateway Gators. These guys love basketball. They ate, slept, and drank basketball. That's all they wanted to do, is play it and then watch their favorite team, which was the UC Davis Aggies, which is based in Sacramento, not far from their hometown. So the night all started on February 24th of 1978, and they were going to see their favorite team, the UC Davis Aggies, play in a place called Chico, California. And that's roughly from Yuba City, about an hour roughly northwest. Not totally northwest, but about an hour north. So they filled up. A guy named Jack Madruga, went by the nickname Doc, was driving his 1969 Mercury Montego that night, and all the other guys piled in. They topped off the car with gas, and they headed up to Chico to watch their team play. And their team won. It was kind of a throwaway game, because UC Davis was really good that year, and Chico State was kind of terrible. But their team won. It wasn't really well attended. And they were real happy because they were good spirits. Their guys won, and they got to see them. So after the game, they went to a place called Bears Market, and they got some snacks for the little short hour drive home. And they'd made this trip before; it was no big deal. And Jack Madruga, that was driving, was a pretty seasoned driver. He had been in the Army. I think of the 4 that were cognitively disabled, Madruga was probably the least so. He was basically probably somebody you just to say was on the spectrum. But he did have a driver's license, and he was a very competent driver. So they get their snacks, they get in the car for that hour drive home, and that's the last time anyone ever saw them alive, other than a supposed witness that will come up later. That was really the last time they were ever heard of. So the next morning, they were supposed to meet up at a local store and go play in a Special Olympics basketball game. And all 5 of them been really looking forward to playing in the Special Olympics game. It was the tournament, the biggest tournament of the year for that. They were going to win a trip to LA and go see Sally Struthers, who was a big star back then. And so they all told their mothers, don't let me oversleep. They had their basketball uniforms laid out. So they had every intention of coming back home. And by the way, all 5 of these guys still lived at home. I mean, they were men, but they were literally like men in boys' bodies in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. But they could take care of themselves. Some of them could take care of themselves. And when they were a group, they were really tight knit and didn't have much trouble because they were very athletic. So, 2, 3 in the morning rolls around. One of their mothers calls another mother, and they're like, hey, have you seen the boys? They should have been home about midnight, or, no later than midnight. Where are they? And then panic starts kicking in about 6 a.m. And then when nobody showed up to go drive to that Special Olympics game, everybody knew there was something wrong. These guys are missing. Then the police get involved, and they start calling the different jurisdictions, and the search is on. And it was later that Monday. They went missing on a Friday night. And of course, the police got involved on a Saturday, and they put out all the notices. And a police officer found Jack Madruga's 1969 Mercury Montego found way off course for them. It was about over 2 hours off course.
Let me stop you right there for everybody. We're talking about February in north central California. So it's winter, it's snowy, it's cold. It's why the Dyatlov Pass kind of thing comes into play here. But this isn't walking weather. This don't picture Southern California and palm trees. No, this is north central California, almost 2 miles north of Sacramento, which is already freezing cold.
Oh yeah, they're freezing.
Yeah. And so they find the car in a snowdrift, right?
They find the car in a snowdrift. past a town called Orville, California, way off course. They found him near a place called the Rogers Cow Camp, and it's an elevation around 5,000 feet up in the Plumas National Forest. So that night they went to the game in Chico. They were all wearing street clothes because it wasn't going to get too cold at, what they were doing. But they didn't plan to go up into the mountains. Obviously wasn't what they were planning on doing, but they were about an elevation of 5,000 feet wearing street clothes. The car was found roughly kind of stuck in a snowbank, but it could have been pushed out by 5 athletic guys. These guys were like really in shape because all they did was play sports. And the car had a quarter of a tank of gas in it. It was fully functional because it later got towed back to Orville, California. And there's no sign of them anywhere. Not one sign of them.
Let me jump in one more. I'm sorry to interrupt, Drew, but that was one of the more interesting comments at the beginning of this case from the police was that car was running. Car was sitting in snow, but my mom could have pushed it out, right? Those kind of comments
easily.
That the car there was no real issues with the car. It's just that we found it in a strange spot, right?
They hotwired it to start it because they didn't have the keys. They hotwired the car like the old school with the 2 wires, literally, and it started up immediately on the first try.
Right. What happened
with a quarter of a tank? Yeah, really strange. There was nothing wrong with the car. The driver's side window was rolled all the way down, which is very mysterious because Jack Madruga that drove that car, it was his baby. I mean, he would not drive it down a bumpy road because he was worried it would hurt the underbody of the car. And they later found out that when they towed it back, that the underbody of the car was still in perfect condition, which is unheard of going up that Orville Quincy Highway that deep into the Plumas National Forest because it's a heavily rutted road. It was February, super cold. There's like muddy snow, melting and freezing again. And they just thought that was really strange. But they find the car. There's wrappers in there from their snacks and everything, and there's not one sign of these guys anywhere. So the search is on immediately. There are dogs up there. There's people searching on foot. A really bad blizzard comes in again that following, I think, Tuesday. So this place is just getting inundated in snow. So it makes the search for them really, really difficult. So absolutely not a hair of these guys turn up in weeks.
And then there was a camp. I'm going to call it a campsite. There was a location nearby that hikers would use, right? And they spent some time there.
No, where they eventually found one of them. I mean, this is after literally they didn't find any sign of these guys until early June.
Right.
No sign. They finally get the first break in the case, and they found one of them, which was Ted Weir. He was the oldest, who's 32 years old. Found him in a Forest Service cabin. I think it's called the Great Basin Fire Camp, right outside a place called the Daniel Zink Campground. And there was some motorcyclists just happening to go through the area. The snow's starting to melt now because it's early June, and these guys pull into this Forest Service trailer compound. There's actually 2 trailers that face each other and with a common deck. And one of the motorcyclists gets off and pulls off his helmet, and he's almost knocked over by this putrid smell. And he's thinking there's got to be a dead animal nearby. And he notices the one trailer, and he walks up to the door, and he's kind of surprised to see that it's unlocked. He walks in the trailer, and he finds Ted Weir, who's deceased, laying on a bed in the trailer, face up, with 8 blankets pulled up to his neck perfectly. And that's the first find of one of the members of the Yuba County Five. Nobody else was found in the trailer other than Ted Weir in early June. And that's where the mystery really begins on finding Ted's body, because in the following days, they did find the remains of 3 others. They never found the remains of Gary Matthias. He's still missing to this day. Some surmise he just got further away from the trailer, but they did find the remains of 3 of the other boys, Bill Sterling, Jackie Hewitt, and obviously Jack Madruga, the driver of the car. They found Jack Madruga's remains. They'd been scattered from animal predation. He was clutching his watch. His right arm was already detached and missing and carried off by animals. So he was clutching his wristwatch in his left hand, which was kind of strange when they found him. And he also still had his car keys in his pocket to the Montego, which they found interesting. But all the remains recovered. Very sad. Some of the parents of the boys were up there when they found the remains. Like Jack Hewitt Sr. found his body, and he found his coat literally. And they were trying to warn the parents, don't be up here. We know we're going to find him. It's going to be very traumatic for you. And Jack Hewitt Sr. picked up a coat, and his son's tailbone fell out of the coat when he found that. So it's very horrible and tragic. But so 4 of them are now found. One of them not found to this day, which is Gary Matthias.
Now let's start to piece this together somewhat. Was there any evidence at the Forest Service campsite, which is the site I was referring to earlier? By the way, I think I called them boys. I meant to say young men earlier.
No, they went by the boys. They literally went. They were literally called the boys.
Yeah,
they were of endearment.
Was there any evidence back at the campsite that because you would think a Forest Service campsite would have some resources there? A way to maybe build a fire, or a book of matches, maybe some food, resources. Was any of that there for them? And if it was any of it utilized? Did they spend any time there?
They did. We don't know. It's still anyone's guess as to who made it to the trailer. We know Ted made it there because his body was found there, but and we think that Gary Matthias made it there because his tennis shoes were found in the trailer. They think that he swapped shoes with Ted Weir, whose feet had gangrene on it. He was missing toes from frostbite, and they think Gary put on Ted's sturdier leather shoes, and at some point headed out trying to go get help. So they did find Gary Matthias's shoes. So we think that almost certain Gary Matthias was there as well as Ted Weir. We don't know if Jackie Hewitt made it. We think that Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga probably perished from hypothermia before getting there, but we don't know for sure. I mean, they took fingerprints, but nothing ever came of it. We don't know. There's no definitive answer of who made it to the trailer or not. But you talk about food. This Forest Service trailer was well stocked, and it was only used. It wasn't manned. It was only manned when they needed it for a particular forest fire. And by the way, this Forest Service trailer was, as the crow flies, it was only 5.7 miles from where the car was abandoned. But if you took the road around how you would kind of do naturally, it'd be closer to like 12 miles. And one thing that happened was a snowcat went up the day before the boys went missing to that very trailer to get the snow off the roof. There was actually 2 that faced each other. They got the snow off the roof so the roofs wouldn't collapse, but it was fully stocked. There was the one trailer they found Ted in, and the one next to it had enough sea rations for all 5 of them to survive for an entire year. They did find some open sea rations there, but it was only 30 cans total. And for even 2 grown guys like that, basketball players are only going to eat, 30 sea rations. It's really strange. There was matches there. There was kindling, paperback books. There was no evidence that they ever started a fire, which makes no sense at all. Then there was also propane that I don't even know if Gary could have figured that out, but there was propane that if they just found the switch, they would have had perfect heat in that trailer.
Everything is strange here. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so maybe a little bit of mental, capacity as an adult wasn't there, but you can still figure stuff out, right?
Oh, absolutely. Especially Gary on his medication. He was taking medication for schizophrenia, but something that if you don't, you'd have to be off of it for at least 3 or 4 weeks for it to really start, for him to start bugging out, so to speak, and starting to succumb to his schizophrenia, because it's something that builds up in his bloodstream. So upon getting there, he would have been the first to know how to at least eat that food or more of it and start a fire. I don't think there was a hearth or anything inside the trailer, but absolutely, when you're freezing like that, you think it'd be your first instinct to go start a fire right outside. Just get some wood, scraps, paperback books, and just light them, and just fighting to stay warm. But there's no evidence they ever started a fire at all.
Why do you think? Let's get into some theories here. Why do you think they left the car?
I think they left the car under some form of duress or direct threat, because they literally fled up the mountain. And that's just not normal, even for, for the guys being, somewhat mentally impaired. They would not do that. It's just naturally you would just go downhill, and they didn't. They fled uphill into the mountains, wearing street clothes in a 3 to 6 foot snow drifts. There's Manitsa bush. I don't know how to pronounce that right, but it's up there and it's really sticky, bad stuff to be in. And they literally fled. I mean, and an interesting thing is that when they found the car, that the driver's side window was rolled down. He would have never left his car like that. I know his cousin that's driven that car. He said, man, he babied that. He would never leave that car with that window down. So I think they encountered somebody there at Rogers Cow Camp and they threatened them somehow and maybe got him up there under some ruse, and they literally fled up that mountain. You know, that's kind of another comparison to the Outlaw Pass, because something huge happened immediately that caused the Outlaw Pass people to cut their way out of the tent. Well, I think they refer to it. Yeah.
Running around buck naked into trees. Right.
Yeah. And I think they call that an unknown compelling force.
Yeah. An unknown.
And that's what happened.
That was the KGB. That was their conclusion. And I'm not saying that in jest. Now there was a witness that was there and saw a few things going on around the car, and I think they might have even had some communication. What happened? Who was the witness?
His name was Joseph Shones. And he was a local from a place called Berry Creek, which was just north of the town of Orville, California, and probably a good 15 to 20-minute drive up to the Rogers Cow Camp where the Montego was found. And Shones comes forward, I think a week or so after it's first starting to make the news in the newspaper that these guys are missing. He comes forward with a story, and it changed multiple times, but the basics is that he was in his VW bug. He drove a little VW bug, and he was heading up that mountain to go check the snow line for a ski weekend or something with his wife and daughter. And his VW bug got stuck in the snow near Rogers Cow Camp. So he gets out of his VW bug. And this is on the night the boys went missing, that Friday night. And this was sometime around midnight. So it's now going to be Saturday, February 25th. Shones gets out to push his VW out, and he suffers a mild heart attack. And he can't do anything more after that. So he gets back into his car for heat, which is interesting because VW bugs don't really give off heat unless you're actually driving, because it's air cooled. It's another kind of hole in his story. But he, at some point, he falls asleep after this heart attack, and then he sees headlights come up behind him, and it wakes him up, and he manages to get out of his car, and he sees these silhouettes of figures behind him, and he's like, help me, I've had a heart attack. He's crying out for help, and no one helps him. And he thinks he saw a woman with a baby in a red truck or something. And then all of a sudden, all the figures get back in the car and leave. And then, in one account, there's another car that comes up behind him, but at the official police report, he boils this down to just one sighting. So roughly about 6 a.m, he's still, in and out of consciousness from this heart attack. He's throwing up outside his car, going to the bathroom outside, but at some point he knows he's got to get out of his car and go get help because it runs out of gas somewhere, early morning. So he walks down the mountain about 5 miles to a place called the Mountain House, which is a lodge, and people are there at the Mountain House, and they remembered that him coming in that morning. So that is true. It's in the police files. And he said, my car got stuck up there, and he remembered seeing the Montego. He said he walked right by it and didn't think much of it. He just thought somebody, because up there they would just park cars and go cross country skiing or whatnot. But they recalled him coming into the Mountain House early that Saturday morning, and he made a comment to somebody working there. He said, I should have done this 2 years ago. And at least two people heard him make that comment. And to this day, we don't know what he meant. But Joe Shones was the town drunk of Berry Creek. And he was the guy would tell stories. And if you called him out on his stories, he would double down, that kind of guy. He was constantly getting his car stuck. So that part's believable. And he would get towed out, or somebody would help him get his car unstuck, and he wouldn't even thank him. So after he goes back to the Mountain House, he gets, a couple gives him a ride back to his home at Berry Creek. Doesn't even thank him, of course. This is classic Joe Shones. So that was his story, that he saw that group that night. So we don't know if he's making up part of the story, or you just don't know, because he's a known liar and his credibility suffers greatly. But he's really the only witness in this case.
Didn't he have another version of the story too, where he saw flashlights?
Yes. That's the one where the car comes up again, and he sees figures get out again. He sees flashlights beaming around him. He gets out again. Help. I had a heart attack. And then nobody comes to help him. And he winds up, he's angry. gets back in his VW because he still has gas in it, still running supposedly for the heat. And then later he makes his walk back downhill towards the mountain house. And then he, recalled seeing the Montego.
Now, what part of this, as you have looked at this case, as far as Joe Shones go, do you think that there is a connection, that there was a second car, and possibly that's what scared the five, the boys, the five men to run up the hill away from their Montego?
There's a lot of theories. One is it in Shone's own story, which changed quite a bit, was that when he was driving up the Orville Quincy Highway that night, that there was a car behind him that was pushing him, like he couldn't get out of the way. He didn't have enough room to turn the VW around because this car was really on his bumper the whole way. So some surmise that when they make it up to Rogers Cow Camp, that Shones has the heart attack, and the boys saw that and got so spooked by it, they just fled up the hill like a bunch of deer. I don't think that would happen. I think they would help people. I think Gary would have probably known the guy needed some form of medical help. So I'm more of the opinion that someone scared the hell out of them, making them flee up that mountain like that, including Gary Matthias, who was a barroom brawler, been in the military. The guy would stand his ground. It would take for him to fly up that mountain scared would take a lot more than a man having a heart attack for Gary Matthias. He was a pretty tough dude.
Now, what about the Yuba County Five themselves? How did they, what's your theory on how they even ended up on that road, so far away from where they were supposed to be?
I know that the fact that they simply got lost doesn't really wash with people that know the case like I do, and some other guys that really research it well, like Tony Doug Wright, who's got a really comprehensive book coming out on it. And we go over and over it, but we think somewhere they got intercepted either at Bears Market or on the ride home and under a ruse, or they got diverted somehow on a promise of something or helping somebody. They lured them up to the Rogers Cow Camp, because this isn't just making one wrong turn. You got to go over this long bridge into the town of Orville. Like they would have absolutely known to turn around, and there was plenty of places to turn around. You would at minimum have turned around in Orville and asked for directions. And they had in his glove box, in Jack Maduka's blood box, there was maps of all of California. That area, the whole state. The maps weren't even touched. They didn't even take them out and looked at them. So something intercepted them somewhere, and that's how they wound up there. It wasn't simply they missed a turn because they were, semi-retarded, as a lot of they would say in the newspapers of the day, because that was unfortunately the term that was used. It's just not the case. These guys knew how to turn around. I mean, that's not what happened. That can be taken off the table.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that should be on the table in this case is that if you're walking 5 miles from your car, and that's in a straight line to this camp through the snow at night, and you arrive at a Forest Service campsite with trailers, that's where you stay. That's refuge, right? It doesn't, and nothing else makes any sense here. I don't care if you're 2 years old, if you're 90 years old, it doesn't matter. You're going to stay where it's warm and safe. That's it. Anything else just doesn't make any sense.
Nothing makes sense. Nothing in this case makes sense. It's like the undersheriff, Jack Beecham, said, this case is bizarre as hell, which is a famous quote from it. None of it adds up. There's a lot of popular theories. I can tell you one that's very popular among some of the families, which I know a lot of the family members, of course, is there's a guy that we just call it, he's still alive, we call him the town bully. And he was a guy that lived in the Yuba City area, and he's a bad guy. He's just had a really checkered past, been in prison. A lot of bad guys back then, but a lot of them believed that this guy was responsible, and that the story is that after the game in Chico, these guys somehow intercepted them. Maybe they were at the game, we don't know, but they found them near the Orville Bridge, or at least drove them there, followed them in their car, made them go to the Orville Bridge, where Gary Matthias is thrown over the Orville Bridge, thus killing them. And then the other 4 are either followed, or someone gets in Jack Madruga's car and drives them all the way up to the Rogers Cow Camp. The only thing going against that, of course, is they found Gary Matthias's tennis shoes in the trailer. But if you could explain that one little thing, how those shoes got there, maybe Gary took them off on the ride home, and one of the boys, just being sweet natured, just didn't really understand Gary wasn't coming back and took those shoes. If there's a simple explanation for that, that theory holds a lot of water, because I can tell you it was so prevalent in the Yuba City area among family members, and that story's never changed, where Matthias is thrown over the bridge, and then the other four are literally ran up there, I guess, to die. I guess they didn't have the heart to kill all of them. So 4 of them driven up there, threatened somehow, maybe at gunpoint, fire it in the air, and then they all 4 go scrambling up the mountain. And that would explain why more food wasn't consumed, because Gary would have, he would have eaten more food. The other 4 might have thought it was stealing, because they were like children, and, they're very sweet natured, because of their disability. So they might have felt that taking those sea rations was stealing, but Gary Matthias would not have. So that is a prevailing theory in this case. That never goes away.
It feels more supernatural to me, and
that's on the table.
Yeah, it feels more supernatural, and I'll tell you why. These guys had hundreds of dollars on each of them. Were they?
No, they didn't have much cash.
Exactly. The car wasn't stolen. The car was still there. So it wasn't theft. I'm not so sure. And the car keys were still in the pot. I don't know. I think something spooked them.
Something spooked them bad. And I mean, if it's paranormal or UFO related, that's the place for it. I mean, all kind of weird stuff happens up in those mountains. I mean, there's people living off the grid. There's sightings of everything you can think of. UFO, Sasquatch, you name it, is going on in those mountains up there in the Plumas. It's you name it can go on. So there is. I mean, the paranormal is definitely on the table with this case, because none of it adds up.
Yeah, and you drive around the corner, something's in the road, you freak out, you drive off the road, your car is sort of stuck, whatever that was comes up to the now, because the human side of this, the reason why I'm going there, and I've always thought that about this case, is that the human element part of it, the criminal part of it, it just doesn't add up. If the car was missing, right, their wallets are gone, their cash, anything like that, okay, all right. But if none of that is there, why would they go up the hill? Why would they go
no sense
unless they were scared? Something scared.
Yeah, a compelling force, and it must have been, like I said, Matthias was, brawler, would pick a lot of fights. He would probably not win a fight against the town bully. This guy was just a really bad guy, but otherwise, Gary Matthias was not a shrinking violet. It's not going to be just some, just Joe Shones being drunk and saying, "Go up the hill, boys," or, it was something pretty compelling that would, if granted, if Matthias was with them at that point.
Now, what about, and then we'll move on, but today we always look at evidence collection and DNA. The car was intact, the trailer was intact. We have a body in the trailer under a blanket. We have shoes. We have. Was there evidence collected on the site, and is there any chance of looking at DNA for another somebody there that could have caused all of this? Was there evidence collected?
No, there's none that we know about. There's nothing collected. They took some fingerprints from the car and the trailer that nothing came of it. It was never even, positively say for 100% Gary was in the trailer. I mean, all we really know is that Ted was, because they found him. The fingerprints in the car, there was, they didn't find anything that belonged to somebody else. There's no DNA, there was no blood, there's nothing physically, there's nothing left from the car or the trailer still in evidence to my knowledge at all.
And if we have a missing fifth body that's thrown off of a bridge and possibly into a wash or into a river, that would have been recovered or eventually found at some point, and the clothes. But we have an actual missing body in this case that is now 45 years old.
Yeah, Gary has never been found. Some people think he got to the trailer and maybe headed out within a week or two. Maybe that's why not more food was consumed. Somebody was taking care of Ted Weir, though. And Ted Weir had lived in that trailer. They surmised by his beard growth that he was in there from 8 to 10 weeks. So somebody had to be taking care of Ted. Somebody was pulling those sheets up to him and taking some care of him to have made it for that long. And we don't know if that's Gary Matthias or possibly Jackie Hewitt, who was the most affected of the five. He was probably had the lowest IQ, but he wasn't, as bad off as people made it seem. He could read and write some because, I know his family members. And, they do say that Jackie was capable of taking care of Ted as well. So we don't know if that was Gary or Jackie, but yes, Gary Matthias has never been found. Some people think he just got further out because Gary was a survivor. I mean, this guy had gone to live with his grandmother up in Portland, and he walked home all the way from Portland to Yuba City. Walked. I mean, what is that, 600 miles or something?
Yeah. Yes.
It's all quiz and water. Yeah, and that's just how the guy was. I mean, it was maybe part of his mental illness that he was a survivor. He was a tough dude. He was in some kind of mental institution. He literally broke out through the plumbing, like Shawshank Redemption. Gary was a tough guy. If anyone could have gotten out of off that mountain, it would have been Gary. Maybe he's in a homeless camp somewhere and he just doesn't know who he is because he's so long off his medication. He would have started really losing it. I know one of the family members, Jack Madruga's aunt, actually, no, his niece, swears she saw Gary Matthias long after the bodies were recovered. She thought she saw him at her parents' bar called La Casablanca in the Yuba City area and recalled walking out of the bathroom and seeing Gary Matthias at the bar. And she was like, oh my God, that's Gary. She went and told her mother about it. And then she called the police. And, by that time, the person she thought was Gary had left, and she knew him pretty well. And the police showed pictures and say, was it, you sure this is him? She goes, yeah, I know Gary Matthias. I've known him for years. So she believes she saw him. I don't know if she really did, but I can tell you she believes she saw him.
Yeah, and back to your point, and then we'll move on to the Zodiac Killer. Orville is it's a city. I mean it's pretty substantial.
It is.
It's not like a 2-horse town. It's an actual city full of people. And if you would know that you were in Orville and heading the wrong way, and you would have simply just turned around and they
asked for help or pull into a gas station or something.
Yeah. Because Orville's a city. It's not even a big town. It's like a real city. So a fascinating case, and I don't know if we'll ever get this figured out. And plus, here's the other part. This is 1978. This is a modern case, right? This isn't people are still around. It's 1978, and you would think that something like this would be solved by now, and it is not, and we still have a missing body.
Yeah, still have a missing body. I can tell you that when we finally got access to all the police files, at one point you had to actually go there to see him on a screen like Tony did, and then later Mopac Audio did a Yuba County 5 podcast called the Yuba Podcast, which is fantastic. I was a part of it. They found out that in the file somebody added a note, and this was only like 5 or 6 years ago, that they considered it a homicide. A possible foul play in this case. There was a note. I think they said that Gary Matthias's disappearance are considering a homicide, and we don't know if that's because they know something or they just wanted to keep the case active by saying that it's a homicide. We don't know. Could this be connected to the town bully? We're not sure of. Now we're wondering more about their coach from the Gateway Gators, because we know now that the coach hated Gary Matthias. He was really evasive during police questioning. He went to the game the next day that he was coaching for the Special Olympics. He didn't go to their meetup place. He actually just went straight to, I can't remember the town, right out of Sacramento where the game was going to be played. So there's some suspicion on him now, and he's still alive too. So there's all these different angles of what could be going on here. Paranormal, town bully, the coach, we're still no closer. Every time you think you figure something out, you have 10 more questions.
Yeah, I think something spooked him. Something
definitely
spooked him. Supernatural or human, I don't know. but something spooked him, and you don't go up. You don't go up. You know what? You know what they say.
You don't go up, you go down. You know,
uphill one way, 10 feet of snow. That's
yeah.
That's
street
not,
clothes.
in
Street clothes.
That's not the direction you go in.
Freezing. Freezing.
Oh man, the Zodiac Killer. Now, I have I haven't done it as much as you, but I've seen just about every documentary I can see. I've read so many books, so much research into this. This case still to this day scares the crap out of me. And I'll tell you what scares the crap out of me the most. We've all, well, us boys, we've all been out with our girlfriend, right? In your parents' car, and you go to some remote location so you can make out, right? And yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And you look up and you see the Zodiac Killer with the cross on his chest staring you down. I cannot get that out of my mind. And then it's, what happens after that, right? Okay. So that's the Zodiac Killer, and that is just a small sliver of one of the craziest cases in U.S. history.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's steeped in mystique. I mean, you had a guy with the Zodiac, like you said, he's wearing that black costume at one of the attacks, and it's only known because there was a survivor of that one. But it's just a frightening image. And three of the there's what we call 4 canonical Zodiac crimes, and 3 of them were couples on basically on a date. So they, like, just like you set up, that's young couples. The first happened on December 20th of 1968. It was a 17-year-old, 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday out on a first date. Had just gone to a pre-Christmas concert because it was getting to be near Christmas, and they were parked doing whatever they were going to do. And a man just walks up to David's station wagon. He was driving his parents' station wagon, and he starts just walked up to David's driver's side window and just starts firing into his car. Betty Lou gets out, and she's shot in the back. David's shot in I think the right side of his head, and he dies. I think a little longer, but Betty Lou's killed. No witnesses to that attack at all, but that's what started it all on December 20th of 1968. That was the first known Zodiac attack. Of course, the name doesn't show up until early August of 1969 when he starts this letter writing campaign. He first sends his first 3 letters with a 3-part cipher in late July of 1969 after the second attack, which happened in a place called Blue Rock Springs Park on July 4th, 69, where another couple shot in their car. Darlene Farron and Mike Migeot out, and they're shot kind of a similar fashion. The man gets out, he shoots into their car, killing Betty Lou. Mike Migeot winds up surviving, but he was really affected by it. But we first know after 2 or 3 weeks after that crime that 3 different letters with a 3-part cipher, like each letter comes with part of a cipher that has to be put together to decode it. And they came to 3 different Bay Area newspapers. And that cipher was eventually broken by a school teacher named Don Harden and his wife, Betty Harden. And they just sat at their table and figured it out. And it was just this weird cryptic stuff, about just the Zodiac rantings, I call them. But the first time he ever says Zodiac is a letter that showed up in early August. It said, "This is the Zodiac speaking." That was when we first had a name of what he was calling himself, was early August of 69.
Do you think, and we're going to get very deep into this case because it is just absolutely fascinating. Again, never caught. We have a long list of suspects. Do you think that the letter writing, and some excellent movies have been made about this and documentaries for sure, but it seems to me that he was upset that nobody knew who he was, right? You know what I mean?
Oh, he wanted credit. He wanted credit.
Right.
He wanted credit. and he wanted to, the letter writing and the ciphers were more important than the actual attacks. I really believe that. I think the whole fear campaign and the taunting in the letters, I think that was somewhat maybe inspired by Jack the Ripper, which we don't even know if those letters were Jack the Ripper, but I think the whole thing inspired him, and he wanted to create fear and panic and really got off on that whole fear campaign of the letter writing. I think that was far more important than the actual attacks. Like I said, he left two victims alive, two of the male victims, Mike Migeot from Blue Rock Springs and Brian Hartnell from Lake Berryessa. Fortunately, Brian survived. That's how we know he was wearing that executioner's hood at that particular daytime attack with that cross circle logo, which basically means Zodiac. So I think that was just far more important to him to the taunting and letter writing been a lot more than the actual killing.
How many, we've got about 8 minutes to the break. How many suspects right now to date?
Oh, man. I'd say 30.
How many?
30 that you could actually have some background on and know about roughly 30.
How many confessions?
God, there's a lot of them have confessed to, maybe a family member said they confessed. I don't know of any direct confessions from a viable suspect. I don't know of any where the person said, I was the Zodiac.
Right. But we have like a half a dozen of those too, as well. It's like the strange, and like I was saying to you earlier, not everything can be right. Right?
No,
so,
we can't be. It can't be all these guys. A lot of them seem very compelling, but it can't. It can only be one.
Do you have? We'll continue after the break. Do you think the Zodiac Killer is still alive?
No.
Okay, so your prime suspect in this case is no longer with us.
No, my guy passed away in 2009.
Okay. Well, okay. So nobody's going to get sued here. Who's your guy?
I believe that the creator of what I call the Zodiac persona was a guy named Donald Lee Cheney.
Yeah, good choice. And your reasons for that are many, because a lot of things pointed at him. But what's your top five?
Oh, I like Cheney, and of course, with Cheney goes his good friend Arthur Lee Allen, who's today the prime suspect in the case.
Mm-hmm.
After that, there's no one that's really strong. Rick Marshall. There's a newer suspect that came along by an author named Jared Kobeck, named Paul Doerr. I think he's pretty good. The way he found Paul Doerr, I'd put him at number 3 after Cheney and Allen. Rick Marshall 4. Number 5, I would say, God, it's hard to come up with number 5. Definitely not Larry Kane or Ross Sullivan. I can't even think of a 5th one. Just those 4 guys are the only ones that I think are even players in my mind. There's a lot.
What about Post?
Oh, he's oh God. Post is terrible. I'm just gonna be honest. He's awful. He's awful. It's great that he's got a champion and an ex-media guy in Tom Colbert, who, I'm well familiar with from the DB Cooper stuff that they've done, but Post awful. He has nothing going for him at all. And you can read these misleading headlines of FBI knows who it is. It was Gary Post. Just read the fine print. They have nothing. An FBI source could be anybody you want it to be. Name the guy. Have a current FBI agent come on camera and say that they believe it's Gary Post, and then that'll start to move a little bit. But in what we call the Zodiac community, online community, he's at the bottom of the list. Literally, it's not just me. It's probably anybody that's a serious student of this case does not give Post any validity whatsoever.
Were you suggesting that that Arthur and Cheney, Arthur Lee, were partners in crime?
I think Arthur Lee Allen had some knowledge of what was going on. I think Cheney was creating it. I think Allen had a cursory involvement with writing the letters. And I think Cheney was the lead attacker, at least on 3 of them. I think they could have both been together at Lake Herman Road. There's evidence of one of the shell casings. Looks like it may have come from a different gun. But I think the rest of it's Cheney. I definitely think it was Cheney as the attacker at Lake Berryessa, where he's wearing that costume. There's a lot of reasons that couldn't have been Allen. Number one, Allen was completely bald, and they both victims in Lake Berryessa, Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell, saw coming through the eyelets of that mask, which had like a clip-on sunglasses on it. They could both see long brown hair coming through the eyelets.
Right.
And Allen was totally bald at that point. So you'd have to say, okay, if that's Allen, he's wearing a wig. So why would you wear a wig, number one, that would have hair that long, and then wear it under a hood that, first of all, you can't see your face anyway. You don't need a disguise at this point, but it would shift, under that hood, which would be a major disadvantage when you're walking up to subdue this couple. And, and he probably didn't figure that the guy, Brian Hartnell, was 6'7", and, almost made a play for the gun at that case. So there's just a lot of reasons that it wasn't Allen at Lake Berryessa. So I think that was Cheney. And I think these two guys were coming up with this together, and Cheney made it real.
Now, do you think Arthur Lee Allen made the costumes?
No, I think Cheney made it. Cheney was an avid sewer. He was an avid sewer. He made leather.
Yeah, I know that they brought all of that up about Cheney, and I think Cheney is one of the lead suspects here for sure, even though he's no longer with us. But it seemed like for me that Lee Allen was a partner in these crimes, and Cheney was going out and committing the crimes, and Lee Allen is doing everything else behind the scenes, like the letter writing and the confusing of law enforcement, writing to 3 different newspapers and ciphers,
Yes.
and creating the persona, and maybe even coming up with the name Zodiac. And then Cheney was committing the crimes. And that kind of fits in my eyes.
It fits a lot. I think the ciphers are all Cheney. Cheney was a mechanical engineer. You could tell when you look at those ciphers that they're perfectly aligned on a grid, horizontally and vertically. This is done on a drafting table, a light table where you have the graph paper under it and then your plain piece of paper over it, so we can write those little symbols perfectly. If you look at them all, they're perfect. Because he's using an alignment grid. It's something a layman just wouldn't have had back then. Cheney was a mechanical engineer, so he was a draftsman, because back then you didn't really have AutoCAD. You did it by hand. And Cheney had that skill set that Allen didn't have. And plus Cheney was a math guy. He was a mechanical engineer. Allen was not. Allen did not have a propensity for mathematics. Ciphers are based in math. The Zodiac talked about, he showed the compass rose over Mount Diablo. He talked about inches along the radians and his bus bomb letter. This is a lot of mathematical influence coming in here, kind of like how Ted Kaczynski becomes a suspect. And I didn't add that for my number 5. I don't think he's terrible, Ted Kaczynski. Add them for my number 5 guy. You can fill it out there. But Cheney had the math background for sure,
Right.
Which Allen just didn't have. So I think Cheney did the ciphers. I think they both had input in the original letters. Of course, Cheney's already, after the first attack, moves to Pomona, California, just outside of L.A. So for Cheney to do this, he had to drive quite a bit. But it's definitely possible. It's a long ride, but definitely doable. When you look at the time of the attacks, they were all either on a holiday weekend, like 4th of July, or a Sunday. Definitely somebody was working. If you look at the dates of the letters and the mailings and the crimes, it's somebody that was tied down to some form of a daytime job, which Cheney basically had. He floated around a lot, but had a young family, and he had to have some form of income.
Now, what do you make of the police had their eyes on quite a few people and were following, and this was a huge case, right? Huge case. They had a lot of manpower and woman power, a lot of manpower on this case, but no evidence, right? It's like the craziest thing. If you were doing, a letter writing campaign, and you're making costumes, and you've got a weapon, and nothing, right? No evidence of this case surfaced.
Nothing. I mean, very little physical evidence. He left behind some bindings at Lake Berryessa. There's, there's were collected by the Napa Police Department, and there's photographs of the police handling those bindings with their bare hands. So forget about touch DNA there. Any hope at all comes from DNA from the letters, and that is just that we need a 4-hour show just to go over that because it's so screwed up.
I know.
It's so screwed up.
It doesn't make any sense. He licked the stamp, right?
Well, Don Chaney famously said that he licked Arthur Lee Allen stamps.
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
That's what started it all for me personally. When I heard that man say that, I was like, wait a minute. What? You licked your buddy's stamps?
Right.
That's weird. And he gave him a thumbprint. He gave Arthur Lee Allen a thumbprint and a ball of paraffin wax. Okay, sure. There you go, buddy. I mean, we're and this guy, you can either just have to say he's a kook or he's involved.
Yeah, exactly. What happened to the evidence from the 3 newspapers? Specifically the San Francisco Chronicle.
All the Chronicle correspondence, of course, got turned over to the San Francisco Police Department, and I think a lot of this came to light when there was a TV show, Primetime Live with Diane Sawyer. So that shows you how long ago it was. I think it was in 2002. And a gentleman, I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Phillips. And he was a producer for Primetime Live in 2020. And he took a real big interest in the case. And he wanted to have this Primetime Live show where they're going to get DNA results. So we're going to really get to the nitty gritty and find out who this guy was. And he started talking to the head police that were in charge of some of this, the boxes of letters and stuff. And he was absolutely floored by what he found out. The way they were being stored was just, some literally like a shoebox somewhere with all this stuff in it. A lot of the officers had taken the letters home to show to their families because there was so much mystique around this case. And they were, handling around. Look, Timmy, that's from the Zodiac at the breakfast table. I mean, literally that stuff was going on with all that evidence. It was deplorable the way this stuff was being stored. And they were going to do DNA testing for the show. And right when they were filming it, Phillips found 3 letters that weren't even known to be had at SFPD that a cop still had in his possession. And from one of those, I think they said they got a decent sample from one.
And here's the trippy thing. We'll be talking about DB Cooper after we wrap up with the Zodiac. But the same mucky muck went on in the DB Cooper case.
There's more. Yeah, I
know. You look at this and you're like,
there's more.
Aren't we talking about the FBI? Aren't there levels of, aren't there standards when they go to Quantico? Aren't there certain things that need to happen? And we'll talk about all of that when we come back. Drew, let's take our break right here. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Stay with us. This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black. Please visit all of our sponsors. We're taking a quick break here. All of the links are below. We'll be right back. Join us November 10th, 11th, and 12th, 2023 as Disclosure Fest Foundation and Fade to Black Radio presents Stairway to the Stars, a Human Origins Science and Technology Expo, live at the Luxor Hotel and Casino on the Las Vegas Strip. With live talks, lectures, and workshops by world-acclaimed researchers and authors. This is Jimmy Church, by the way, and I'll be your host all weekend long. Featuring topics like human origins, ancient technologies, indigenous teachings, workshops, a mass meditation, yoga and sound healing, music, and so much more. Don't miss our intimate sky watch and meteor shower over the infamous Area 51 airspace in Rachel, Nevada, with special surprise celebrity hosts guiding us through the night. Also introducing our Disclosure Fest VR Starship area with dozens of rides. You've got to check it out. This event will sell out. For more information and tickets, please visit disclosurefest.org. This is Jimmy Church, and I want to introduce you to LifeWave's X39 stem cell activation patch, which has totally transformed my health, my sleep, brain, and my eyes. I no longer need reading glasses. X39 is a true breakthrough in regenerative science. Using light, X39's patented age reversal technology is clinically proven to signal the activation of younger stem cells, accelerating the body's natural healing process. X39 promotes restoration and rejuvenation, bringing the life-changing benefits that I've experienced. By naturally elevating a master signaling peptide in the body, X39 boosts vitality, health and wellness, and resets 4,000 genes to a younger, healthier state. It's one patch, once a day, and you can turn back time with X39. Just go to healingworksnow.com. That's works with an X. healingworksnow.com.
Hey everybody, it's Billy Carson, also known as Forbidden Knowledge. I want to talk to you about a very special event coming up July 30th, 2023, the Forbidden Conscious Awards. We're going to honor people who have been contributing to the conscious community for decades. People that you know and love that have helped you get to higher levels of thought and consciousness and awareness. It's going to be a live in-person event, but seats are going to sell out very fast. You want to make sure you're there in person, and guess what? You can help vote for the winners. Voting is available on forbiddenknowledge.com, and the categories are going to be social media influencer, podcast/radio host, TV host, actor, director, producer, entrepreneurs, health and wellness, philanthropists, authors, field researchers, archaeologists, space anomaly hunters, and of course, a Lifetime Achievement Award. I'll be your keynote speaker that night at the Forbidden Conscious Awards. We have celebrity guests performing. We'll have a halftime show where we're actually going to perform music for you. And don't forget about the pre-event mixer, where if you buy a box seat, you'll be in the VIP section, and you also have private access to a VIP mixer with celebrity guests. Shake hands, break bread, network, and then walk the red carpet with us and take amazing photos. It's gonna be a night to remember. You don't wanna forget this. Make sure you hurry up and get your tickets because they're selling out very fast. I wanna see you there. Forbidden Conscious Awards 2023.
River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right, welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church, and tonight we're talking to Hurst Beeson, and this portion of the show is brought to you by Accidental Truth. It is the new documentary directed by Ron James, streaming on all platforms. The links for it are below. Yes, this is required viewing by our entire community. Accidental Truth. Check it out. I say it all the time. But my 8 seconds in this film. All right, we'll leave that right there. Hurst Beeson is our guest. And now, Drew, we're talking about the Zodiac Killer. And today, I don't think there isn't a day of, 7 days a week. I don't think that there isn't a day that we don't get a headline that says DNA solves cold case, right? 50 years ago, somebody DNA has solved it. The killer's, was buried 20 years ago. He's no longer with us, but we have solved the case. And I've read of one today. I read another one yesterday. This happens all the time. Why? What's going on with the Zodiac case? Why is there no DNA evidence of one of the biggest cases in history?
Well, the first obvious thing is the Zodiac was not a rapist like the Golden State Killer was. And, although the Golden State Killer, Joe D'Angelo, committed multiple rapes, I think it was still, kind of a good break and even having good DNA on him. And of course, they match that up. Genetic genealogy, which is all the thing now, is how they trace them down. They'll find an uncle, then they find a guy that kind of fits the profile in that region of California that was living there at that time. And that's how they narrowed down to catch Joseph D'Angelo, one of the most notorious bad guy killers of all time. So when that happened, being California, people are like, why can't we have that in the Zodiac? Well, because he just didn't leave behind much. He didn't. We have letters that you have adhesive, like you lick the envelope flap, you lick the stamp potentially. But like I was saying, it's so screwed up in this case. I think, from the SFPD, they said, the best sample they got is from a letter that the Zodiac wrote in 1978 that says, "I am back with you." And that's not even considered a legitimate Zodiac letter. I think that most of the experts on it, like handwriting experts, kind of weighed in and said they think it's a forgery. So there's not even agreement that that's a legitimate Zodiac Killer letter. The last agreed upon authentic Zodiac Killer letter, it was in 1974. It's called the Exorcist letter. So that's, a big reason why he just didn't leave behind. There was no blood. When he was, the only knife attack was Lake Berryessa, of course, where he's stabbing Brian and Cecilia. But the only thing he left behind there were some bindings. That, like I said, there's a photo of the police touching it with their bare hands, because of course they didn't know that, DNA was going to be a thing. There's technology is getting better with DNA. So my hope is that they do eventually get a really good sample from some of the letters, mainly from letters that were housed by the Vallejo Police Department. So when the Zodiac sent letters to the Vallejo Times Herald, obviously those get turned over to the Vallejo Police Department. And of course, Vallejo is ground zero for the Zodiac crimes, because the first two crimes were near there. And of course, Arthur Lee Allen lived at dead center in Vallejo at a 32 Fresno Street. So they sent their letters off that were at least hoping were stored a little better than SFPD, and they sent all their stuff off for, I think, advanced DNA testing. And we have not heard anything back, and that's been years now from Vallejo. There's a rumor out there that they did get, and it's a rumor, just take it with a grain of salt, that they did get a DNA sample from one of them, but it was from someone that could not have been the Zodiac Killer. And the rumor is that it's DNA of a woman, but we know that the Zodiac's a male. There were witnesses to him, so who knows who licked what? But now throw that into the mix. But my hope is they finally do get a good DNA extraction from a letter.
Wasn't the Golden State Killer a suspect?
For Zodiac?
Yeah.
Yes. Actually, a lady named Ann Penn wrote a book about that. It's called Zodiac What If.
Right. Why? What's your theory? Why did the Zodiac Killer stop killing?
I think it could have been like, going back to Golden State Killer, like Joe D'Angelo. He just stopped.
Right.
He they thought maybe this guy's in prison or whatever, but now that we know that, he was discovered, that he just stopped. He had a family, he had a job, and he just quit. Maybe he thought that, he was just pressing his luck. I think the same thing happened with Zodiac when his last canonical victim, a 29-year-old cab driver named Paul Stein, was murdered in the Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco on October 11th of 69. Very brazen attack. The killer gets in the back of the cab and, tells him to pull up on a certain street at Washington Cherry Street in San Francisco, and shoots him in the right side of the head above his ear with a 9mm pistol. Just a really brazen attack, but he almost got caught that night. There was a couple of police actually drove right by him and looked at him. And the only reason they didn't know it was him is because they put out through the SFPD that they were looking for a black male and not a white male. And it was just some kind of error or screw up. And if not for that, he may have very well have been caught that night of the Paul Stein killer.
There were the gunshots were heard.
Yes.
And wasn't it it was around the corner? I could be wrong here, but it was around the corner from the San Francisco Chronicle.
Right? No, it's a little further away. Away.
But but it was brazen, right? It
was brazen. Yeah, it was at night, but it was just a very brazen attack. The only witnesses to it were three teenagers that lived across the street. Their last name is Robbins, which kind of came back in the Zodiac news lately, which is interesting. That the oldest one, his name was Lindsay Robbins. I think he was 16 at the time. Saw the perpetrator after he did it, and he saw him wiping the cab down, obviously to hide fingerprints. But now, according to a Zodiac researcher, his son has come out and said that his father told him that never tell anyone this till like 2 years after he died, which Lindsay Robbins did pass away, I think 4 or 5 years ago. He's pretty young. I think he was in his early 60s. I'm not sure what happened to him, but his son said that his father told him that he actually went down, left, the upstairs of that house and went down to help Paul Stein, who was already dead. but he tried to help him up or something, and he wound up touching the cab with his own hands, thus leaving his own fingerprints on the cab. But he never told the police that. So I guess the police showed up, ambulance, paramedics, after he had done that, and then he goes back to his house and keeps that a secret. So that's something new that happened, which is interesting because a lot of people say there's definitely have to be Zodiac's fingerprints on that cab. Well, now there's a huge wrench in that.
Yeah, for sure. And before we move on to DB Cooper, with that night, they didn't know it was the Zodiac Killer. He told the police that he did that killing and gave them the evidence for it.
Yeah, what he did was he wanted to make sure he got credit for that crime and that they knew it was Zodiac by sending in 3 different letters that had a piece of Paul Stine's bloody shirt attached to it, a swath of it. He cut out a good sized piece about that big from the tail end of Paul Stine's shirt that was covered in blood, and he cut up little squares of it and he sent it in 2 letters to the SFPD and or the Chronicle, and then one he sent to attorney Melvin Belli. Like if you see the movie Zodiac with David Fincher, it actually shows a piece coming out of what's called the Halloween card that was sent to San Francisco Chronicle reporter Paul Avery. And that's just a little bit of Hollywood because, he did send in pieces of shirt, but not with that infamous Halloween card.
It's a fascinating case. It still creeps me out to this day. I mean, all of the elements of it meant to terrify. And I've often questioned the publishing of the letters, the talking about the correspondence, the ciphers itself, and the eyewitness testimony to this. It seemed like we were primed and ready for a bunch of copycat killings, and then you're going to further muddy up this case. And it just seemed like it was handled. The police, their hands were tied for sure, but it seemed like they just handled it the wrong way.
They did, and what happened here was once they heard about Arthur Lee Allen, they could not get rid of him. I mean, a lot of them went to their graves believing it was Arthur Lee Allen. So Don Chaney comes forward in July of 1971 saying, "Hey, my buddy's the Zodiac. He told me on New Year's Day, 1968, that he was going to call himself Zodiac and he was going to go kill couples on lovers' lanes, blah, blah, blah." So if you believe Don Chaney, Arthur Lee Allen has to be the Zodiac because this obviously predates Lake Herman Road. That's where it all starts. And also remember, Arthur Lee Allen was questioned in these killings before then. He was questioned just 10 days after the Lake Berryessa attack by Detective John Lynch with the Napa PD of possibly being involved. And no one knows to this day. He could not remember why that they questioned Allen because, yeah, he was a creepy guy. He was a child molester, but no one knows why Allen was questioned so early on in the case, even before Chaney comes forward with his allegations against Allen. But when you dig into Chaney's background, he has more circumstantial evidence for him than even Allen has on his own. That's what you don't expect. That is this called, the surprise versus no surprise principle. Chaney's circumstantial evidence, because it's still a circumstantial case because we don't have that smoking gun DNA, but Chaney has some crazy circumstantial evidence, like going to the same junior college in Bakersfield, California in 1952 with Paul Avery, the guy that made himself famous by reporting on the Zodiac, played by Robert Downey Jr. in the movie Zodiac, and John Chaney's tiny little junior college with Paul Avery the same year where there's only 150 male students think he knew him or knew of him.
Right.
Of course he did.
It's a crazy case. And I just hope, it's going to pop up in the headlines, with DNA that this is finally solved. When you go back to cases like the BTK killer, and I remember reading about BTK, right? But the case had gone cold, right? No BTK, and then suddenly he's back, and
because of himself.
Because of himself. And he just it was just shocking to me that some of these cases, like of course DB Cooper and the Zodiac Killer, that go unsolved. The BTK case, you know, a printer at the church was his downfall. And
Yeah, he sent a letter to the police. Yeah, it was on a computer disk that he wiped out, or he thought he wiped out, and they recovered it, and there was a letter from his church, you know, where he was like the head of something at his church. That was his downfall. And it was literally a victory lap because it was on the anniversary of one of his murders that he wanted to taunt the police. Kind of like a lot like Zodiac. So
a lot like
him,
Zodiac.
you know, Dennis Rader, by doing that, inserted himself into the case by sending that to the police. So I think that's what Don Chaney did when he accused Arthur Lee Allen as being the killer, because his goal was not to see Allen go to prison for this. His goal was to stay close to the case he created. He only wanted Allen to stay on his toes. He did not want Allen to go to prison. He wanted Allen is simply a vehicle to insert himself and say, hey, I got this solved. It's my buddy, Arthur. It's all under the guise of Arthur told me.
Yeah, and BTK, Dean Braden, Dean at his church, right? He was a local, he was like a police inspector, right? Wrote citations, right?
I think Dennis Rader was I think he worked for the phone company. And I think that was his guise of getting in these houses and attacking these women was, you know, I'm here to fix your phone line or something. It was something in that capacity, I think. But yeah, he had some high position at his church.
Yeah, I thought he was an inspector. I thought he was like going around writing citations for barking dogs and fence.
He might have been in his neighborhood, but I think he
He
had
worked
some
for
kind of trade where he would have to get into houses.
But you would never. He was just the guy that you would never suspect, right? Dean.
Yeah, no, not at all. His daughter, his own daughter, had no clue.
Nobody did. Nobody did. He just dissolved back into society, you know. And
he was his own undoing. He had some pride in what he did. He was the BTK. He came up with that moniker and took a victory lap, and it was his undoing when they took that, you know, I think it was that old style computer diskette, you know, floppy disks.
Yeah.
And he thought he wiped it out. And that's when they were able to recover it and found that letter from the church.
Now, here's the thing. If you're going to be an OG serial killer, don't name yourself. See, that's,
like the Zodiac did.
Yeah. No, let us give you the name. You can't call yourself BTK.
Yeah, like Golden State.
No, go right, exactly. DB Cooper. Now, strangely enough, with DB, the real DB, which that's not his name, but anyway, the real DB, you would think would have bragged or would have done something to reveal himself. Do you think he got away with it?
Yes.
You think he lived?
Yes.
Do you know who he is?
I know who I like. I know all these suspects backward, forward, hung upside down.
I know you do. Is he still alive?
No.
Oh, now we're getting good. Okay. All right. How many DBs? Just give me a round number. How many DB Coopers are on that list?
Wow. I mean, I think even the FBI had over 1,000 suspects.
Mm-hmm.
Over 1,000.
Now, we were talking about bungled evidence. In the DB Cooper case, which it's like, I don't want to call the FBI Keystone Cops, but in this case, I think they've kind of asked for it. But
they did.
Here is for me, and I want to hear from you. But for me, the one thing where if you're going to do a face slap, right, a face palm, it's the cigarette butts.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Is
for
that
me
your,
too.
Is that your number one?
Number one. You just don't lose them. The FBI does not discard evidence like that.
Okay,
they
so
don't.
Tell everybody. See, now back then, all right, for you young kids out there, I know this sounds crazy, but you could smoke on planes. And not only that, you had an ashtray built into your armrest, and you would flip it open. You'd puff your right, and in your armrest. I know that sounds crazy today, but that was life, right? That was life in the 60s and 70s, 80s. Probably still smoke on planes in the 90s, as far as I know. But anyway, that's what DB Cooper was doing. DB sitting in the back of the plane, and he's puffing on his Pall Malls or whatever he was smoking.
Rally filter tip.
That's it, rally filter tip. And he's putting the cigarettes out in the ashtray. What happened to those cigarette butts?
No one knows. There was 8 of them. 8 of them. He smoked 8 Raleigh filter tip cigarettes. The FBI did collect them and had them for a while. And at some point, they just go missing, either from the field office in Seattle. At some point, they were rumored to have been in the Vegas FBI office, then maybe at Quantico. But the line on it now is they've said they're gone. They were discarded. We don't know when or where, but they're gone.
Okay, now
kind of fishy.
Yeah, I'm going to ask exactly. I'm going to ask you the $1 million question. How would you lose that evidence? How is that possible in a case like this? Hijacking, parachutes, ransom money, the whole thing is involved here. Kidnapping, hijacking, and you've got cigarette butts, and you lose the evidence. How is that possible? How?
They wanted him to be, in my opinion. I got it. I don't go conspiracy on everything. I don't. But this case I do, because you just can't explain it. You just can't. The FBI does not lose evidence. Now, granted, in 1971, no one ever heard of DNA or being able to trace somebody from the cigarette that they smoked. But let's say that they found a really good candidate and they hauled him in court and they said, Mr. Jones, we're told by your wife that you're an avid smoker of Raleigh filter tips. Is that true? Yeah. Well, bring in the cigarettes now. You have to have that for that. They just don't get rid of evidence like that. Recently, the case that my friend told me about up in Rhode Island, there was a lady that was raped and murdered in the same year as DB Cooper, 1971. In the little small town in Rhode Island, the police managed to keep a cigarette that the assailant smoked just in case for whatever in the future. And sure enough, like just months ago, they got DNA off of that cigarette and found the guy that murdered the lady, who was living in the same apartment complex. He had been in a fight with his wife. He was all mad, and he ran into this single lady, raped and murdered her. And unfortunately, he died before he could face justice. But he was, they found out who he was from a cigarette discarded at the crime scene in 1971. But the Rhode Island people can keep it, but the FBI can't keep 8 of them in the only unsolved hijacking in American history. Makes you wonder.
Now, I understand the conspiracy side of this, which is extraordinary. It seems that, and I've watched the FBI's press conferences on this case, like you have, some of them pretty recent, actually, that you would have the evidence in this case under Fort Knox lock and key. And they're really nothing else should be accepted in this case, right?
Nothing. I mean, there's supposedly a hair that was recovered from the back of the seat rest in the seat that Cooper was sitting in, and it was put on a slide, like a lab sliding glass, the little glass thing, and marked and labeled, and that was supposedly at FBI headquarters or whatever. Well, guess what? That's gone missing now. No one knows where the hair slide is that came from the headrest. So add that to the cigarette butts.
Right. Okay, so let's back up. I know we got ahead of our skis, but that cigarette butt thing, man, it just bothers me. It just doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. So, they don't get rid of evidence like that. They just don't.
They just don't. So now let's back up. So the plane gets hijacked. DB Cooper was something that happened in the media, and that was a misprint and so
misprint forth. Yeah, somebody found a DB Cooper that lived near somewhere, Portland or whatever, and the AP picked it up where they said, we're looking into this DB Cooper guy, and there actually was a DB Cooper that they were looking into, and they went to his house, and they quickly figured out he wasn't the guy. I think he might have even been a small-time criminal. But, of course, the name that the man gave when he bought a $20 ticket at Portland International to go to Seattle, gave his name as Dan Cooper, of course. So the DB was just a media screw up that got picked up and became legend.
So plane gets hijacked, plane lands, he demands parachutes and cash. That gets delivered to the plane. The passengers depart. He's got the crew.
Yep.
And the plane takes off. Basically, in a basic sense, because we all know the story, right?
Yep.
Okay, so now the plane is in the air. We've got dummy parachutes, right? We've got one. Who packed the chutes? Where did the parachutes come from?
You know, the whole parachute thing is another reason this case is upside down, because there's not even a whole lot of agreement there. A guy
Right.
named Earl Cossey said that he was the packer of them and that he delivered them to SeaTac Airport. And another guy named Norman Hayden with Ithaca Sky Sport said, no, they're my parachutes. So it's still to this day convoluted because they both dispute what the other said. And I know Bruce Smith interviewed them both, and they both give conflicting stories. Because Cooper asked for 2 front shoots and 2 back shoots, which is, you know, that's kind of a layman term. You know, skydiver wouldn't use that shoot. They would call them reserves or mains. He asked for 4, which is smart because it made him, you know, them think that he was going to take a hostage with him. Of course, the shoot that was supposedly shown shut is something that came from Earl Cossey, who said it was one of his ground training shoots and that it was no good. And some people took that to make it believe that Cooper was an inexperienced skydiver. Well, that wouldn't have mattered anyway, because the back shoots had no D-rings on them where the reserve shoots could hook onto. So that was all mute anyway, you know, so it really didn't matter. But there's still not complete clarity on who brought them. Were they Cossey's? Were they Norm Hayden's? You know, we don't know. Cossey was kind of the FBI guy who, you know, kind of led the narrative on, you know, was Cooper experienced or not? And he was mysteriously murdered in 2013 in Washington in his driveway, and nothing was stolen. Really strange. And days after the murder, someone mailed back not his wallet, but the contents of his wallet to his family anonymously. So just another one of those weird Cooper things where, you know, the guy that said he supplied the parachutes was murdered mysteriously in 2013.
And so the confusion of these shoots. I want to stay a little bit on the shoots. There's so much more to discuss in this case, but in the confusion of these shoots, apparently, you know, how the shoots were packed, and even if these shoots would work, is a point of contention. But apparently, Cooper picked the right chute and jumped out of the plane with the right one of the 4. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, as far that was definitely the one he picked was usable. It was a back, you know, parachute on his back.
Right.
Obviously, there's no reserves because there's no way to hook it. You know, they have to hook to your main. There was no rings for that. So what he did is the one thing that they didn't get right when his demands were $200,000 in cash, the 4 parachutes, but also he demanded that they bring the money to him in a knapsack. They did not do that. They brought it to him in a canvas bank bag. So he was pretty perturbed about that. So he had to improvise on the spot. So what he did was use one of the parachutes and he cut the shroud lines and he started wrapping them around his body. You know, he took a pocket knife out and cut the shroud lines to one of the chutes he wasn't going to use and tied that money bag around him.
Right. And the indication is because he knew that there was a lack of D rings that he didn't have a backup chute. So he must have been experienced. He must have been a paratrooper, which pointed, you know, to the military and some kind of training in this.
Yeah, I mean, there's arguments made both ways. I know some people now, like I guess so-called experts, are like, well, we don't think he was experienced because any experienced skydiver would have brought their own rig, which is kind of true. But you know, the Daredevil doesn't care, especially a military guy. You know, they had their own parachutes, but I think that, you know, knowing that he might take a hostage to Daredevil anyway, he was not going to really lug around his own parachute. Of course, Richard Floyd McCoy brought his own parachute for his hijacking, who's a Cooper suspect, of course. And it actually deployed on the plane before he could even use it. It knocked out one of the stewardesses. You know, the ripcord got tugged or something, and it popped out of the container and knocked down one of the stewardesses on his flight. And then he had to wind up taking one of the ones that he brought him. You know, they brought him. So, there's arguments both ways. Was he experienced or or was he not? One of them that they claim point against it was he didn't bring his own parachute, and that McCoy did it because he was afraid they were going to be tracked. They're going to put trackers in it. My contention is that Cooper was jumping into the thickness of the Pacific Northwest, north of Portland and Vancouver, Washington. It's so dense. By the time they could have tracked that chute, he's long gone, in my opinion. So there's things for and against it. Of course, when they brought Tina Muckler brought the parachutes to him, she said, "Hey, here's the instruction cards," and he said, "I won't need that." And she said he put the rig on like he knew what he was doing. So there's things that point experience and
both ways. Both ways. Me, if you hand me a parachute, I'm not going to survive. I won't know what to do with it. That's not going to be a good day in my world. But here's the next part. He jumps out of the back of the plane. Now, that particular plane, and again, you got to imagine this, people. There was a stairway that deployed off of the back of the plane. You would have to know. That's right. Underneath the rear wing, right? There was steps that would come down.
Yeah, aft staircase, a rear staircase.
And I remember those when I was a kid. But here's the thing. You would have to know how to deploy that. You would have to know, A, that it was there, and B, how to deploy it. And the crew would know if it was locked or not. And how would he have known that he had access to that unless he was an employee of an airplane company, or he knew something about the back?
Or they had done it in Vietnam or over Cambodia, which had been done. Air America had did some drops over Thailand with that plane, testing that out. And most people did not know that. People worked at Boeing didn't know that. The main thing that he knew was that the plane could take off with that stare down. It could take off with the stare down, and that's what Cooper wanted, of course, because he knows he's going to jump once it's airborne, and he's and if it's not, he's going to have to contend with getting it down in flight. So he actually was arguing with the flight crew who's getting advice, from the airline, Northwest Orient, about, can we do this or not? And the pilots thought that they would break the plane apart. So they absolutely refused. So Cooper relented, said, okay, go ahead, take off with the stairs up. But he wanted him to take off with it down, of course, because if those stairs don't drop when they're in flight, he's in a jail cell up there, and he knew it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Now we're going to cut some corners here. We might run into a little overtime tonight. Can I keep you maybe 5-10 minutes after?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's get rolling here. So, as I alluded to earlier, with all of the radar, this is a Boeing 727. This is a modern aircraft. With everything that we have with technology today in flight control and tracking, that's one thing. Back then, we did have radar. We had a basic idea of what was going on. But he has them lower the altitude, right? Very curious. Yep. And then he
knew the settings.
Yep. And slowed the plane down. He jumps. They never found, even if he died, they never found his parachute.
Never found the parachute.
In the United States, right? In the continental United States, over a populated area. Now, granted, it's the Pacific Northwest, but we're talking about Seattle. We're talking about Portland. We can even mention, if you want to, Reno and Tahoe and other areas. It's not like this is no man's land, but
it's not. It's not no man's land. They make it out to be, but it's really not.
It's not. But they never found his parachute. Which, does that tell you that he survived, that he collected his chute and then met somebody in a car and took off running? I don't know. But do you think?
I think they would have found it by now. All the hunters, over 50 years of hunters, and
people looking.
They did find one parachute. I think in Amboy, Washington. It's called the Amboy chute, but it was determined not to be the right color of the one that Cooper took, which was a Navy backpack with I think a C9 canopy. Military style parachute, but they deemed that wasn't it. But they never found the parachute. They never found the body. You know, a lot of people think that he just landed in the Columbia River and froze to death. That he was a no pull. You know, he never opened up a chute. That's why they didn't find it. It was a no pull. He crashes into the Columbia, freezes to death, hypothermia, and it drags him out, you know, wherever to the ocean. You know, that's one theory.
Or he just got away with it.
Or he just got away with it.
Okay, so in 1980, a kid hanging out on the Columbia River playing in the sand, right? Literally, comes across, I think, $5,000. Heavily deteriorated, but serial numbers are there and partial serial numbers. Turns out to be DB Cooper's, some of DB Cooper's money. All right. Now, a lot has been placed around this with different people and different suspects and knowledge and so forth. Do you think that DB buried the money there, or do you think it floated there naturally and got covered in sand over time?
I think it was planted. I really do. I mean, I know some people I'm friends with are screaming, no, but I really do. I think it's planted. There was 3 stacks of bills. It was roughly $5,800. 3 stacks. Some of the rubber bands that were on them were still partially intact on the sides of these 3 bundles. They're called bundles. You know, there's all this terminology. I mean, there's people that are hardcore into this. And like I said, it's a second mystery within a mystery is how that money got there, because it really wasn't along the flight path. And the flight path was known. They were being tracked by radar. It's called, I think, the Victor 23 flight path. You know, they didn't really deviate from that. I mean, some people the plumb as far as over the Tina Bar, where the money was found, but it just didn't. It just doesn't really pan out that it got there. So there's all these different theories. There was a dredging operation in the Columbia in 1973, and they thought maybe the money got dredged up and dumped on, you know, the Tina Bar like that. But, you know, just it doesn't add up, because there's 3 stacks buried on top of each other, which with some of the rubber bands still intact. I just don't see how natural means is going to make it do that.
Yeah.
You know, and then Tom Kay, who leads this group called the Citizen Sleuths that did all the tie testing on DB Cooper's tie that he left on the plane. You know, he did a lot of research into the money and you know, did different experiments and floating money down the river and whatnot. But he found that on the money had this, I guess it's a fungus. It's called diatoms. And what they found on it by putting this under a powerful microscope, that the money had summertime diatoms on it, meaning it was planted sometime closer to summer and not when DB Cooper jumped in November. So that's another thing that points to the fact that the money was not found there the night he jumped. Maybe it got away from his body, of course, or during the fall and it just lands there.
Or he survived and he just dropped it. Okay. Let's circle back now. I forgot about the tie. The tie. Okay. To me, this is like a bungle. This is another Keystone Cops moment. You have, okay. DB's wearing a suit. He's got a tie. And forensically, I would think, we watch too many CSI shows, right? Okay. They're all there. If you have that tie today, it's case closed. Right. I mean, it's case.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Without a doubt.
They found, now you can correct me, I'm just going completely off of my memory over research over the years into this case, but they find specific metals on this tie, some traces.
Exotic metals.
That were traced back to Boeing in Seattle, correct?
No, that was never traced to Boeing. One of the strangest thing they found on it was pure titanium. The airline industry used alloyed titanium. That's what you'd mainly see in aircraft. But when they originally found it, there was talk of maybe, this person worked for Boeing or was laid off. And that's explains how the metals got on there. They actually, the same group tested a tie from a guy that worked at Boeing, like in the, hubbub of all of it. And they tested his tie and there was metal on it, but it was nothing close to what they found on Cooper's tie, which was pure titanium. Something called antimony, which is interesting, and how that was mixed with the titanium. That's how a company comes in called Rim Crew out of Midland, Pennsylvania. Maybe it's tied to that. But man, that tie just goes on and on. I had somebody send me the other day that showed me that all the elements found on that tie could be found in fireworks. I mean, literally fireworks. antimony, titanium, glitter. They found glitter on the tie, which I think when Tom K saw that, he thought, okay, this, maybe he's a ladies' man, has a girlfriend or a wife, and it's from the lady's makeup. But there's glitter in fireworks. Like, I mean, seriously, a lot of the main components of that tie can be found in fireworks. Some of that could have come from the jet engine under stress because it's flying with the aft steer down until it lands at Reno. There's so many places that stuff could have come from. I mean, we know that the tie didn't exist until I think 1964. It's a JCPenney Towncraft. Some of the patents on the antimony and titanium are from the 50s. There's a couple of good, at least one good suspect. A friend of mine champions named Nicholas Broden, named Vilton Vordal, who worked at Rim Crew, that would have been around some of the metals, but he has no parachute experience, but he's otherwise a pretty interesting guy. Kind of looks like the sketches. So, it's an avenue to go down. I don't think he's a bad suspect at all. And it's certainly what, the hardcore Cooperites, the people, what we call the Cooper Vortex, dig into, because that's what they have. They have that tie and they have the analysis of the metals. So they chase every lead all day.
Yeah. What about DNA on that tie? You've got to use your hands to tie a tie.
Yeah, they tried to get DNA from that tie, and I know the last time it was tested, it came back as Tom K's DNA. It was the guy testing the tie. So they I think there's multiple samples, and it's from a tie, so it's just not really. I don't think we're ever going to get good DNA from that tie. I wish they would. I really do. I wish they could get DNA from there, and they say we know this is Cooper's. But the tie, you think about it. This is like the Zodiac letters in San Francisco. That tie was kept in literally like a shoebox in FBI custody, where employees, they would have parties, they would wear that tie because the mystique of it. Hey, I'm wearing DB Cooper's tie. It was in a box with the parachutes. It's been barehanded. It has not been stored right. I know some guys are trying to get it released again to try to test under the spindle of the tie, maybe to find some DNA there. But now the government doesn't give it up again because they'd already given access to the citizen sleuths to examine it all they wanted. So I don't think it's going to happen again. I don't think that they'll ever give the tie up again for testing.
Now, your book, you talk about Ted Braden. And has your opinion? Okay, well, wait a minute. Hold on. Before I ask, exactly what I'm going to ask. Has your opinion changed? Who was Ted Braden? And I've seen interviews with him, and I've seen a lot of stuff with him over the years. And of course, he was the focus of your book about DB Cooper. So tell everybody who Ted Braden is, and let's jump into that.
Yeah, Ted Braden was a true enigma. I mean, a guy like Ted Braden comes along once in a lifetime. He was a real Rambo. Of course, the movie Rambo was based on Audie Murphy, a World War II hero, of course, set in Vietnam. But Ted Braden was Rambo. I mean,
he was.
A smaller guy, but this guy was a badass with a capital B. He joins up to fight in World War II. He lies about his age. He goes over to fight in World War II at age 16. And he's in the Battle of the Bulge, and he's sneaking out to the German listening post, or the U.S. listening post, because he knows the German guys are going to go out to their listening post at age 16, because this guy just wants to get so close to the action. He's fighting at Bastogne. He gets 2 Bronze Stars at that young age, seeing hardened combat. He gets back. He's from Toledo, Ohio, and he goes to 2 or 3 years of college, but he's a career military guy. And he gets back into the Army, and what he finds out that he's just naturally really good at is jumping out of airplanes. He's a total natural at it. He's just a pioneer of what they call HALO, high altitude, low opening parachuting. And he's in an Army sports skydiving team called the Golden Arrows, and he's going all through Europe, winning all these competitions for skydiving. I mean, I think he won most of them, or his team would win. He was just that good at it. One of the guys that actually would fly these guys for their jumping back in the early 60s was Chris Christopherson. He was one of the pilots back then in the Army, in the 8th Division in Germany. So back then, Braden's friends with this guy named John Singlov, who is later becomes an Army general. He was in something called the OSS in World War II. It's called the Office of Strategic Services. And he was literally a co-founder of the CIA. And he winds up becoming friends with Braden in the early 60s at the parachuting club in Germany. for the 8th Division, and they swap World War II stories. So next, Braden can be found fighting in Vietnam in 1965, and he becomes he's a part of something called Project Delta, and he's teaching halo parachuting techniques to the indigenous fighters over in Vietnam. You know, the people that are from the area, the different tribes that are fighting with U.S. Special Forces, and he's teaching them halo. And then he becomes a member of the Black Ops unit in Vietnam of Special Forces. It's called MACV SOG. And these guys just do all the crazy stuff. It's Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, which sounds really benign, but these guys are the top tier of Special Forces going into Laos, which we weren't supposed to be in Laos. So they went in there sterile. They didn't have anything that would ID them, no markings, no dog tags, nothing. And if they got caught, sorry, guys, we can't claim we know you because you're not supposed to be in Laos. But they were doing wiretaps. Ted Braden was what they call a 1-0. That was a team leader on a SOG team, and they were made up like 7 to 8 guys. There'd be 3 or 4 Americans, and the rest would be what they call mountain yards, which is a tribe out there that became really good fighters that were trained by our special forces. So Braden does the first wiretap in Laos, hooking up a device. I mean, really crazy stuff with his team. Always got his guys out. He was doing crazy stuff in Vietnam. I mean, he was a daredevil. He liked adrenaline. He liked to push it. He was when he would jump over in Vietnam, he liked to pull the ripcord under 1,000 feet. Just crazy stuff that no one would ever do. I mean, he was that much of a daredevil with skydiving. But he was actually one time slept on an NVA bunker in Laos for 3 hours, like a NVA headquarter bunker. He had no fear of death. I think he was in combat so long, he was starting to get a little, crazy in his mind, maybe PTSD type stuff, but he literally had no fear of death. So, you know, that's Braden's career in Nam. He's there for 2 years, 24 months consecutively. A guy that was with him over there said, Ted Braden is among those professionals that has a secret death wish coupled with amazing survival instincts, was how he was described. So 2 years in Nam, he finally just decides to desert Vietnam, just on his own. He's just going to leave and not really tell anybody. Gets back to the United States. This is it in December of 1966. He's been in Vietnam for 24 months. He goes back to the States for a couple of months, and he winds up over in Belgium trying to find work as a mercenary. So he gets recruited to fight in a group called Five Commando down in the Congo Wars. So he goes down, he gets recruited for Five Commando. He goes down there, does all the testing. They're impressed with him. He uses an alias of a Canadian guy named Edward Joseph Horner. So he's down there fighting under an alias of a Canadian guy, which is kind of interesting. And the CIA finds out that Braden's down there. Somehow somebody ratted him out. I think his colonel, a guy named Peters, finds out. 4 guys come out of a corner at a hotel after Peterson says he needs to meet with Braden there, who was his superior. And 4 guys come out of the darkness with guns at Braden's head and said, "Are you Ted B. Braden?" He's like, "Yeah, you got me." And interrogate him for 3 days, strip him naked on a bed, all this stuff, fly him back to the United States. He's put in Fort Dix, in the brig in Fort Dix, in jail, military jail at Fort Dix. Enter a guy named Hank Birch that I know really well, who was overseeing Ted Braden in Fort Dix. And he said he knew something was different with this guy immediately because he was getting special treatment. He had a television set in his cell at Fort Dix. He said, "This is unheard of." He said he had cigars in his cell. He said, he's like, "What is going on?" He goes, he couldn't believe where this stuff was coming from. Somebody was taking care of him. And Hank said, how do you have all this? And he'd just say, "Don't worry, sir, this will all work out." He had no fear that something was going to happen. So long story short, he winds up getting, they were going to court martial him. And then a guy named Harold K. Johnson, who was the secretary of the Army. I can't remember his title, but he was the highest up guy in the Army under the President of the United States, calls down and says, "You're not going to court martial this guy. You're just going to give him an honorable discharge and let him go." And they go, "Why? He's a deserter. He's down for desertion." And he said, "Well, we don't have enough MPs to secure the courtroom." And they were like, "Are you kidding me? This is Fort Dix. This place is crawling with MPs." So it was just some drummed up thing. And they lined up Braden at the front of the line for people that were getting let out of jail. And you'd usually line up by rank. And they had a colonel in there. They had Braden, who was a sergeant first class, in front of the colonel, So he was getting special treatment. So this is, his story. This guy had friends in high places.
Yeah, and he was a hero. He was a hero and got stuff done in special forces. So the hijacking happened in 1971. Now, and I may have, there were so many suspects in this case, but with him specifically, did he flip flop on him being DB Cooper?
What do you mean?
Did he say that he was DB Cooper and then change his story? Did he?
No, no. His third wife, he was married to his third wife in 1971. Not much is known about Braden from 1967. There's an article written about him in the 1967 Ramparts magazine, which is kind of this anti-government, establishment kind of thing. And it's a fascinating article. Big picture of Braden. It's the same one as my shirt here.
Yeah. I love that picture of Braden. And
it's a great picture. And he puts this ad out about, which is just stunning.
Yeah. Come and get me.
Yeah. Mercenary soldier, master parachutes, 900 free falls, all this kind of stuff. So he was literally still looking for work as a mercenary then. But he was not allowed to, part of his getting his honorable discharge is he was never allowed to join the military again. So that was his grudge.
Now, okay, so why is he your prime suspect?
Because, I was into the DB Cooper case before I ever had a suspect. I wasn't looking to solve it. It was actually Bruce Smith, who's considered the mayor of Cooperville, was looking into him on the DB Cooper message board. I think it was the Drop Zone. And he was talking to another guy that was a longtime DB Cooper researcher named Snowman with Bruce. And they were talking about Braden's background. And I was just floored hearing about this guy because I love all Vietnam special forces. So I thought I want to look into this guy for myself, because at that time I kind of liked Wolfgang Gossett is a suspect, but I never promoted a suspect or cared. When Colbert came forward with Robert Rackstraw and he had that History Channel thing, I was like, hey, I hope this guy solved it. I love this case. So he solved it. Great. Well, no. But that whole thing falls apart in the show and Rackstraw just falls apart as a suspect. But the more I learned about Braden, the more I thought this is the guy because the special forces guys are convinced it's him.
He looks like the pictures that were drawn from the flight attendants' descriptions.
He looks like the sketches. Of course, there's three of them. There's three composites, so they all look different. But he looks a lot like the sketches. I mean, there's a couple other suspects that are better matches to the sketches. Braden's a little shorter than the height estimates for Cooper. He's 5'8". Tina Mucklow said 5'10" to 6 feet. Florence Shafter said 6 feet. You had Bill Mitchell, the college student, who I think had the most relaxed view of Cooper.
Well, that's why next to him, right? He sat next to him. Right.
He sat next to him.
Right,
Bill Mitchell sat next to him, and Bill Mitchell said 5'9", 5'10", and he said he was a guy. Bill Mitchell was 6'2". He remembered saying, I could have easily handled this guy. Like he even made a comment somebody knew saying, "Man, I would have been in deep doo doo if it was Braden," because he just thought I could easily have handled him. So judging height from a seated position is not an easy task.
Were you able to place Braden in Seattle?
No, not. I can't place him in the Pacific Northwest. But other than that, it's all upside. But he was a long haul trucker. He worked for Consolidated Freightways at the time that was based out of Portland, later moved over the river to Vancouver at the time. So he was all over the place. He's a convicted felon. He got convicted of really interesting felonies after the Cooper crime. One of my best pieces of evidence is what's called DB Cooper number 6. And I have a copy of it here. And so let me read this real quick because it's a short letter. And it says, it's written to the Portland Oregonian newspaper on March 28, 1972. It says, "Gentlemen, this letter is to let you know that I am not dead, but really alive and just back from the Bahamas. So your silly troopers up there can stop looking for me. This is just how dumb this government is. I like your articles about me, but you could stop them now. DB Cooper is not real. I had to do something with the experience Uncle taught me. So here I am, a very rich man. Uncle gave too much of it to world idiots and no work for me. I had to do it to relieve myself of frustration. I went out of the system and saw a way through good old Unc. Now you know I'm going around the world and they will never find me because I am smarter than the system's lackey cops and lame duck leaders. Now it's Uncle's turn to weep and pay one of its own some cash for a change. And please tell the lackey cops D.B. Cooper is not my real name. Sincerely, a rich man. That's how Ted Braden wrote. That's how he insulted people. He would.
He did. He did.
Uncle and Sam, he would do. If you read Ramparts, that's how Braden wrote.
That's right. He poked at everybody all the time.
Yeah, and the way he had alliterated a world idiot. What's a world idiot? That's something that Braden would say. Who's Unc? Unc is Uncle Sam. You taught me how to be this soldier. This is how Braden wrote. I mean, you read Rampart, you're like, he says, no work for me. He was always about the black market in Vietnam. This is his alibi. It's called Ramparts 1967. This is his motive. Ted Braden's motive is written for us before the hijacking. That's one thing he has. And I think he wrote that letter. I'm convinced of it. I am. And it's the only D.B. Cooper letter that isn't signed D.B. Cooper. All the rest of them are signed D.B. Cooper. Well, that wasn't even the name he gave. It was Dan Cooper, first of all. So I never thought the real D.B. Cooper would just latch on to the moniker.
Right. That was creative, a mistake by the media to begin with. And one last, who was the guy? Oh man, I don't have a bunch of notes in front of me. I don't do the show that way, so excuse me for not remembering. But who was the suspect that was the fan of Dan Cooper, the Canadian comic book character?
I can't remember who tried to tie their guy into that. I mean, of course, that's just.
Yeah, I know. I was fascinated.
Somebody layering a guy, but
I was fascinated.
I don't know who claimed that.
Yeah, I was fascinated with that angle, and it just came back to me again. If you don't remember, and I don't remember, but there was.
I don't know what's. Yeah, I don't know. Of course, the Dan Cooper comic book was a Belgian comic. It was made in Belgium. It was written in French. I think there was a couple other versions that were written in other languages, but. They said you could get it in French speaking Canada, but it was a Belgian comic out of Belgium. I mean, so people think that he took the name from the comic book. It's possible. Braden had a lot of connections with Belgium. I mean, he was in Five Commando. It was Belgians. He got recruited in Brussels. I mean, the guy'd been to Belgium plenty of times, jumping and been all over the world. But who knows? I mean, there's actually a magazine that a guy found called Air Tells, I think, that was an American magazine that had a story about a Dan Cooper who was a parachuting guy that wasn't Belgium. It was actually an American thing. So it could have just as well come from that.
Such a fascinating, and again, I don't know if we'll ever find out. I don't know.
The only thing this is reality with this case. The only way we'll get close is Tina Mucklow's memory. It's the only way we're going to get close. People can say, well, she doesn't remember. She went and joined the convent because she was traumatized. Of course, she's making a movie now about her experience as being the prime witness in the Cooper case. It's called Not If You Understand. I could tell you she listened to a podcast about Ted Braden and was highly intrigued by it. I can tell you that for a fact. And pretty sure she probably went and looked at photographs of him and told people about Ted Braden that she was closely associated with. You heard it here, folks. That's the truth. Tina Mucklow knows who Braden is and told people about him. That's all I can say. So now, maybe she comes out with something in the future. I don't know, but that's all we got here is Tina's memory.
Okay. One last question. And thank you for hanging on for a few extra minutes. I'm going to answer the question first. And my answer is yes, they do. Okay, that's my answer. Do you believe the FBI knows who D.B. Cooper is?
The high-ups, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, me too.
I think Hoover knew. And that's why I think it's Braden. It's not a Robert Rackstraw who they threw out of the army for lying. This is Braden because he knew not only what they were doing in Laos and illegal activities over in Vietnam, because, Braden had so many ties to the CIA that could be proven, obviously fighting in the Congo and everything he did. But he knew what they were doing globally, and not just because he had friends in high places like John Singlob, who ordered a lot of assassinations. They feared what he knew. So why wouldn't they just kill him? Dead man switch. Maybe Singlob's protecting him. Maybe they're afraid something's going to be put in the mail. I don't know. I think they feared what he knew, and he knew a lot. He knew quite a bit in the circles he ran with. CIA,
Right.
MACV-SOG, which was run by the CIA.
All of that. And here's the other part. You don't jump out of the back of a 727 with a parachute that was just delivered to you with no fear unless you knew exactly what you were doing. You're just not going to do that. You're not. You're. It just doesn't make any sense unless you're somebody like Ted Braden. And the
jump would have been a cakewalk. It's a cakewalk for him. He could have done that jump blindfolded. I mean, it hung upside down. He was that good of a parachutist. And I think he did a halo. I think he haloed out of there.
Didn't his third wife? Now, again, there's so many suspects in this case. I've seen so many interviews. Didn't she come forward and say that he told me he was DB Cooper?
His third wife said that she fully believed that he was. And I think she did say that he told her that. His stepdaughter told me that. Which doesn't speak a lot about this at all, but his entire family believed that he's Cooper, and this is where he's separated other respect, because one person to believe there's other guy was Cooper that knew him. I know at least personally 8 people that believe that knew Ted Braden personally, that believe he's DB Cooper.
Right.
Guys that served with him in Vietnam are convinced it's him. I'm MACV-SOG. These guys were they were jumping out of helicopters. Billy Waugh, who recently passed away at the age of 93, 28 years with the CIA, 28 years, took the first surveillance photos of Osama bin Laden, 25 years U.S. Special Forces, top Special Forces legend.
Well, I hate to break this to you, Drew, but
told me.
Okay. Your internet has just failed, but at least we made it this far. Are you back? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Government.
Just let me say thank you so much. And DrewBeasonBooks.com. The link is below. Everybody go and check out Drew's work. It's amazing. It's DrewBeasonBooks.com. We have the links not only below, but over on the website and throughout social media. Drew, thank you so much. And I look forward to having you on the show again very soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jimmy. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Perfect show tonight. And being able to run into overtime with Drew. Drew, thank you so much. This is Fade to Black. It is DrewBeasonBooks.com. And let me remind everybody, tomorrow night on the show, I have Terry Commando is on with us tomorrow night. We're going to do a little CE5 talk, and he's got a 6-7 volume book set out now on ufology. We'll be talking about all of that tomorrow night. All right, so get ready for that. That is tomorrow. And wow, what a great conversation tonight. Zodiac Killer and DB Cooper. Man, the Yuba County Five. Perfect show. Thank you, Drew Beeson. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Thank you to Dennis and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy. SpaceboyMusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and this broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2023 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Until tomorrow night with Terry Commando, I want everybody to be safe. Go back, Lee Tepe.